Hello and welcome back to Building on a Budget Models. I'm Thomas and this is the third part of the Belkits MG Metro 6R4 Monte Carlo Rallye 86 build in 1/24th scale. Now firstly I looked at this walk around video I did of the Clubman spec, which is slightly different, but I decided to use some tips from that to inspire this. Now there are some parts of the engine bay here which need to be done in flat aluminium from Tamiya. This had all already been done in gloss white TS26. The instructions asked for the kind of interior to be in semi-gloss black, but I decided that by keeping it white, as the version I'd seen at the museum was, you wouldn't lose so many of the features. I then used some more flat aluminium for wires and pipes and things like that in the rear. Then started adding features to the interior. This pipe here was done also in aluminium. Then there are 4 little hoops which need to be done in semi-gloss black. These are for fixing the backs of the seatbelts. This kick plate here is in semi-gloss black as well, as are the pedals. Now this part here actually should be the same colour as the interior, so later on I went over it in white. There's then some electrical parts which also need to be done in semi-gloss black. This here needs to be drilled. I'm still not quite sure why that is. And the gear stick is also in semi-gloss black. Battery fits here behind the passenger seat, and there's a pipe here which I think is to do with the fuel perhaps. Then decided to add a little bit of gunmetal to the tops of these bolts on the top of the suspension to add a bit more detail, and also added a little bit of black panel line accent around these parts, including the wires, in order to add a little bit of depth and definition. I think that improves it quite a bit. There's a pipe here that goes from the kind of handbrake. This was done in matte grey, and this wrench here was done in gloss yellow. This had actually snapped, so I used a bit of super glue to fix it back together. I was pretty happy with how it turned out. The fire extinguisher was in gloss red, and then I added some features in matte aluminium. There's then a decal which goes in the middle of this, and I also used some decal solution to help it fit into place. Also recently got this 3D printed decal solution stand from Rory. It's really useful. These parts all fit in really nicely. Some parts that go kind of behind and below the dashboard also need to be in semi-gloss black. There's some decals to pick out sort of the buttons and lights and things on this. Adding some decal solution like Microsol or UMP really helps them kind of adhere to the surfaces and kind of brings out the definition of the shapes. Most of these holes slot through underneath. Now the dashboard was done in semi-gloss black, and I then went on to add the decals. The dashboard is really strange. I think someone at Austin Rover decided that having the dials in front of the driver would prove a distraction, so they used a left-hand drive dashboard in a right-hand drive car. Used some other colours like red and things like that to pick out some buttons. There's then some other features like a timer and a kind of walkie-talkie device which go underneath. The timer was done in brass. Then you add a decal to the top. I thought about using my method for a curly wire here for the walkie-talkie, but I quite liked the moulded one that came with the kit, so I decided to keep that. pretty happy with that. To add a bit more of definition, I used a little bit of silver on the end of a cocktail stick to pick out some of the switches. Steering wheel was all done in semi-gloss black. Then once I put it together, I used some matte black for the textured outer part. These all fit together very nicely. Now the door cards were also done in semi-gloss black, but I used some satin blue for these handles. The seats also in semi-gloss black. Now you come with a full range of photo etch buckles and some ribbon for these. Not usually a fan of ribbon, but I thought I'd give it a go. Firstly, stretch it straight out and cut it right in the middle to make sure that you'll have enough for both seats. For this job I use a brand new pair of nail scissors. Now a tip that I learned from Justin at JH Model Works is to cut the ribbon at a diagonal in the end, which really makes threading it easier. If you'd seen my recent tips video to thread seatbelt buckles a lot easier, leave them on the frets, because then you don't have to worry about dropping them. So once you've threaded them nicely, you can then remove them from the fret. And when you're ready to glue them into place, put a small blob of CA glue, gel, and flip over the end to glue them together. Looks pretty good. Then once one end of the seatbelts was glued together, I then threaded through the other end and sorted out the length before giving the excess a trim. There's then another buckle which goes here, and a sort of hook which goes onto those other hooks at the back of the cockpit. Once I was happy with the length of the seatbelt, I put a small blob of CA glue at the bottom of the seat to keep them in place. Pretty happy with how that looks. Then did exactly the same thing for the other side, and for the lap belt it just has a seatbelt buckle which goes on the end of the ribbon, and then you fold it into place and glue it down. You don't have to glue these down, but you want to give them the kind of essence of gravity. Now the buckle that goes in the middle has two ribbons threaded through on either side. Then threaded this through, and when I was happy with the position, I had a little bit of super glue underneath to fit it into place, and then trimmed off any excess. And then pushed this down into place. Pretty happy with this. These are, I think, the best ribbon seat belts that I have ever made. There's then some little seat frames which go on either side. Just use a little CA glue to fit these into place. I then decided before adding the seats to add a little wiring detail, so I used some of the Tamiya cable, which I use quite often, and glued it into place, moved it around with the tweezers. Not sure how much you'll see these details once it's all finished, but it's nice to know they're there. There are some Recaro decals that go at the top. And then in order to fit the Sabelt ones into place, I used the UMP Strong decal solution, because that really kind of helps the decals adhere to the seatbelts themselves. These push into holes in the bottom and can easily be glued from underneath, and the hooks are good enough to actually hook the seatbelts to themselves. When I was happy with the positions here, I added a little super glue to fit them into place. Now the door cards have got this fine line which needs to be silver. I used a very thin brush to do that. Then there are pockets at the bottom which also need to be done in semi-gloss black, and there's a kind of part of the roll cage which goes across, which is also in semi-gloss black. These will fit really nicely into place without the need for glue. It's important to put the door cards in before the dashboard. Used a little bit of Tamiya thin to help secure these. There's 2 pinholes for the dashboard to fit into place. I think the details in the interior are picked out far better with the floor being in white, but please do let me know what you think in the comments. Next video I'll be adding more details to the engine and putting it together. Thanks a lot for watching. Please do comment, like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.